I'm Lynette Fields. I am the Executive Director of Poverty Solutions Group. I've been involved in cross-community work really for over 30 years, and really was a part of founding Poverty Solutions Group that came out of community transformation and poverty reduction work that we have been working on in partnership with St. Luke's United Methodist Church since 2013. And happy to be there today. Adam, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Adam Hartnett. I use they, them pronouns. I have a background in social work and currently serve in Poverty Solutions Group as the regional circles coach. And we'll talk a little bit about circles as we go, but I'm wearing my shirt today to represent. And happy to be a part of the CRC network as well. And Tiffany, do you want to talk about yourself?
Absolutely. I'm never good at it though. My name is Tiffany Kelly. I currently live in the DC metro area. I've been here about 3 years, but I was born in Florida. I currently work for the federal government and work really hard in my area as an anti-poverty advocate. I use my experience as a descendant of generational poverty, as a provider of social services that perpetuated some of these community ACEs to really aid me in doing the transformative work we need to do to stop managing poverty and really begin to end it. Thank you all for having me here.
All right, we want to do some grounding. Thank you very much, Rachel, for having us read through the PJI principles again this morning for those of you who are there. Particularly when we're dealing with some really tough topics, and we're going to share some personal stories, we're going to some history about our community, some really tough things to grapple with. I'm just going to lift up one of the PGI principles, and it's the turn to wonder. People's reactions may surprise you or be different than yours, and I encourage you to turn to wonder and ask yourself why that might be. Often we hear something, and if it's different than ours, we might want to take a defensive stance, and I would encourage us to turn to wonder. We just want to also share that this is some real life stuff here in Central Florida, and it may trigger some things that you've heard in your own background, and just to be aware of that. And self-care is really important. And if you need to step away, we would encourage you to do that. And we always think it's helpful to let people know ahead of time so that they're just prepared for that. And also, just another part of setting the context, we have cited our examples. We know we're living in an era where facts are often in conflict with one another, and what is a fact is often debated. And we would just ask for you to not, if you have a difference in opinion of what the perspective we're sharing, to not necessarily take that into the breakout room. Adam and I welcome input. If you have some other information that you feel that would make what we're sharing more accurate, we'll be sure to share our emails a couple of times throughout the workshop so you can contact us directly. But we would really want to create a hospitable place, another PJI principle in the breakout rooms where we won't necessarily be there as facilitators, but want to have a space where it's not necessarily argumentative, but helpful for the whole purpose of this conference. Does that sound good for everybody for setting the context? And maybe a thumbs up or for that. Thank you. All right, we can go forward. So we're just going to do an overview. It's really if you were able to join us yesterday, Dr. Johnny shared a lot of this, even some of the same picture. Let's go to the next slide, Adam. This is the 3 realms. I was so excited 2 years ago when in this conference we started to excited probably isn't the right word, because it's incredibly daunting and overwhelming when you put these 3 realms together. But for me, the excitement was we're broadening the conversation to get to more sources of some of the things going on in our community. And so I think this is a really powerful image. So in the tree, that's the adverse childhood. It's the things that happen within the household, right? Then number 2, and we're gonna in the next slide, you're gonna see all these. So if you can't read everything, we're gonna spend basically the rest of the workshop talking about the ones in 2. But that's what's in our soil, what it is that helps a tree be healthy or unhealthy. And these are the adverse community experiences or environment. And then 3 is just things that are outside of the control of an individual and a household and a community that are happening around us. And when I first saw this picture, we hadn't been experiencing a global pandemic. So number 3, unfortunately, is incredibly real to us right now in our current day and age. And I added in the chat yesterday when it was brought about a global pandemic, I think it's important to remember that not everybody experienced the global pandemic the same way. And we know that there were incredible disparities in the impact of the global pandemic. All right, so let's dig into these a little bit more. You'll see a list here of what's in the soil and the difference between a healthy soil and a not so healthy soil. So this was brought up yesterday also in our conference. So Dr. Wendy Ellis, who's the Director of Community Resilience, she works with the Milken Institute, which is part of the George Washington University, and she was a presenter in April 2020. Very, very powerful presentation. The pair of ACEs tree is planted in a soil steeped in systemic inequities and dysfunction, robbing it of nutrients necessary to support a thriving community. Adverse community experiences such as lack of opportunity, limited economic mobility, fear of discrimination, and the associated effects of poverty and joblessness contribute to and compound the adversities experienced by individuals and families. So you'll start to hear the layering of the ACEs. Often these community adversities are perpetuated because the community systems themselves serving children and families are not coordinated. Adverse community environments are the result of policies and practices across multiple systems that were perfectly designed for place-based inequities they produce. So particular geographic areas are going to experience the layering of the 2 ACEs differently. Many of the nation's poor living communities have concentrated poverty not by choice, but rather by design. And these are closely connected to the social determinants of health. So even with this list, it's extensive, but it's not exhaustive. In our experience with Poverty Solutions Group and circles, we have found that policies around an under-resourced person who loses benefits, that creates an effect called the cliff effect, or benefits a cliff. People face a benefits cliff when they receive public benefits from the government, and then they earn a raise, and then they discover that they make too much money to receive those benefits, but it's not scaffolded equally. So they're still not making enough money to sustain themselves and their household. Predatory lending is also not on this list, and it's another contributing factor that incredible high interest debt for many of our people who live below the poverty level. And one example, look where you see payday lenders, rent-a-centers, pawn shops, no credit check car lots. What neighborhoods do you find those types of businesses in? All right, Adam.
Yeah, before we move on, I'd love for Tiffany to share a little bit about her experience with some of these community ACEs.
Absolutely. I can attest that I've experienced all of these in some form of or capacity. Particularly, one of the things that I like us to have conversations about in 2022 is the barriers that are created to people that are seeking help. That was one of the main that was one of the main ACEs that I experienced. As we begin to navigate systems for help, such as food stamps, Section 8, WIC, all the forms of government assistance, those tend to take a lot of time. It's excessive documentation that we have to provide to prove the need that we have. And as a person that is working in a job that pays low wages, time and money are things that we simply don't have. I never had enough time, vacation time, to take off. When I was on the Section 8 program, there was a window for the annual inspection to happen, and they could come anywhere between 9 and say 12. So that took money out of my pocket, money that I needed, and it also took the very precious time that I just did not have to waste. And we are still perpetuating that for people that need assistance.
Thanks, Tiffany. I think it's really important as we go through this. We're going to bring all of these community ACEs down into focus. So we're going to see how adversity looks personally, but also specifically in the Central Florida community. You may not live here in Central Florida, because I know this is a virtual conference, but as a network, that's where we're focused. These several counties in this area. So I want to talk a little bit more about what do some of these look like here in our soil. What are the nutrients we're getting, and what are the nutrients that we're lacking here? So as we go, if you think of a good example, I would really encourage you to share it in the chat. I'll be looking at it. I'll probably bring it into the conversation, or Lynette might as well. So what are some adverse community experiences that you've seen, experienced, or heard about in Central Florida? Please do share those in the chat as they come to mind. Yeah, Division Avenue, right? So that picture here it's a very, very clear depiction of something called redlining that Lynette's going to dig deeply into as we go. So in Central Florida, one of our adverse community experiences and environments is our landscape of substandard wages, which creates a high degree of poverty in our community. The Alice report that the United Way produces really puts the picture into perspective for us. We see that in all three of our Central Florida, like main counties, there are high rates of not only poverty as defined by the federal poverty line, which is 14% in Orange, 12% in Osceola, and 9% in Seminole, but there's also a very wide margin of households who are considered to be asset limited, income constrained, and unemployed, still experiencing the weight of poverty while still holding a job and having financial assets, but still not really being able to cover all of their costs, right? So we see that the weight of poverty, this adverse community experience, is affecting half or more than the people who live in our communities in Central Florida. And it's not just that they're experiencing poverty. We see that poverty has effects across the landscape of adverse experiences as well. Lack of access to to nutritious foods that are critical to development and preventative health. We see that living in poverty decreases your ability to achieve academic standards across the early learning into post-secondary learning, and really poverty affects you in a more visceral, emotional, psychosocial way than we talk about usually. We talk about the financial effects of poverty, but when you're in constant fear of losing housing, utilities, transportation, ability to connect like phone and internet, access to good education for your children, not enough time to sleep, it piles on and piles on to these adverse experiences. Let's see, I see there's a lot going on in the chat. Yeah, Tamila said affordable housing is a big issue. Rachel said Bithlo has poor water quality, inadequate housing, lack of resources, transportation, and medical, right? So extending out into the east side of Orange County. Tiffany said there's 2 residents of Winter Garden reached out to her about not being able to get healthcare on time to cover what they need. And community health centers specifically discharging folks from the hospital and not really being able to cover their needs in a timely manner. Jessica works in Holden Heights area. She sees children crossing OBT to get to school, a 6-lane highway, right? The safety hazard of the environment. Yeah, and there's even more. Rachel, Kathleen, Joe Levain and they're all sharing in the chat, so be sure to check those out. Another pretty huge adverse community experience is structural discrimination. And I say structural discrimination because often we hear the terms discrimination. I think it's really easy to think of the way we treat each other, so our interpersonal kind of interactions. But the adverse, and that can be an adverse experience, of course, and it's influenced by our structure. But I say structural discrimination so we can take a look at those isms: racism, sexism, heterosexism, transphobia, ableism. These are other ways, other adverse community experiences that show up in our community. And just a few illustrations of racism in our community. In Central Florida, Black folks are 2 to 3 times more likely to be arrested and 4 times more likely to end up in jail for drug and weapons violations that happen across the racial spectrum. So that's compared to white folks. And of course, there are other demographics of race that aren't represented in these statistics. But just to illustrate that discrimination, that structural discrimination affects people in many ways. Also in Orange County, the Black unemployment rate has consistently doubled the white unemployment rate since the 1960s, consistently doubled. So another employment discrimination persists across time in Central Florida, in Orange County. Also, women in Orange County continue to be paid about 25% less on average than men for the same positions, the same work. And these discrepancies vary across education level and occupation. So we see that structural discrimination isn't a foreign concept that we can just kind of like point to in other communities. It exists here in Central Florida as well.
And Adam, I would like to add something to that as it relates to the criminal justice system. Oftentimes when the person that's being affected is a woman, the entire family is destroyed. The children are parceled out to foster care, and re-entry is even more tough because you have to be able to work and have a place to live for you to get your children back.
Mhm.
And once that record is there, that's nearly impossible. Once you're touched by a criminal record, it is nearly impossible to get out from under the weight of that. So the poverty systems will be constantly perpetuated. So it's something we need to consider as we look at women that are going to jail. Also living here in the DMV, we don't have bondsmen in this area because people don't have to post bond to get out of jail for low level offenses. And when a person that's in poverty goes to jail and they can't bond out, that definitely will shift the trajectory of what happens to their family.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. Thanks for shedding light on that.
Adam, if I can add just one thing really quickly too. I was appalled when one of our circle leader families had a teenager in their family that was did commit a crime, sent to the juvenile center, though that crime hadn't been tried yet. And on Michigan Street, because we're talking about Central Florida, that there was Rachel's heard me talk about this, dedicated parking for the media and access for the media in the courtroom, even though you couldn't show faces, but out in the hallway, it was free game. And just, Tiffany, along with what you were sharing, I think that means the media has access to the parents before they get legal counsel. They're in the courtroom, and I think it traumatizes the families and it perpetuates a stereotype about crime in our community, because we know other families with more resources who have lawyers right away do not have access to that camera.
Yeah,
I would encourage, I'm sorry, Adam.
Oh.
I would encourage any of you that have time to take a ride down and sit in on the juvenile court proceedings. It will transform you when you see the Black and brown small hands and faces that are going through that system, oftentimes without family present because they have to work. It will really change how you see the way juveniles are handled.
Yeah, I think this kind of leads us into the next adverse community experience. Rachel and I and about 28 of our peers served on the safety task force for Orange County about a year ago. Over a year ago now, I think. And it was sobering to see the way that the juvenile justice system creates and perpetuates adverse experiences for youth and really cycles them back into the criminal justice system. Exposure to the criminal justice system increases your likelihood of committing a crime in the future through various means. And we learned of this wide view of violence in our community as well, often kind of categorized into spaces. There's domestic violence and there's community violence. These adverse experiences kind of span from within your household all the way throughout the community and within our systems and structures, perpetuating these violent acts as well.
Adam, are the DV stats here? Is that Orange County or?
That's Orange County, yes. So this is according to Sheriff John Mina. So domestic violence in 2021, there were roughly, according to John Mina, 4,300 calls and 3,700 charges in Orange County. And when we look at community violence, it's often statistized as gun violence. So there have been 227 shootings between January 1st and June 10th of 2021, and that includes 73 victims. And that's compared to this year, there in the same time range, there were 183 shootings and 58 victims. So we saw the way that, I think this speaks to the way the pandemic affected our community's rate of violence as well. So how these adverse experiences compound each other and can often exacerbate the effects of those experiences. The last adverse experience that we'll kind of brush over until we dig a little deeper is around food scarcity. So we know that that we have plenty of food in Central Florida. It's not that we have a lack of resources, thanks to Second Harvest and other awesome organizations. But Feeding America projects that 13.8%, that's 1 in every 7 people, and 20.1%, that's 1 in every 5 children, live in a household that might be food insecure. So not having enough food isn't just a lack of nutrition and energy and all the things that food is. It creates a social emotional strain on not only the family, but the individual kids. I said earlier a little bit how that can affect not only your ability to function, but your ability to learn, your ability to take in information, your ability to interact with other people. So I want to ask again, have you seen any of these adverse community experiences play out in your community, in your work? Please do share them in the chat as we go.
Adam, did you see the Jacqueline's question before we move off the overview? Are you?
Oh yes, Jacqueline, thanks. Yeah, so Orlando does have a civil citation program. Orange County has one as well. It's relatively new according to what we were told in that safety task force. I don't know if you remember more details on that, Rachel.
It's been around a long time, but I think because Orange County was not performing well, they were doing much better in South Florida with civil citations. I think John Mina stepped it up and they really have done more to offer civil citations to young people. The program lagged in Orange County, but the last data we saw was stronger. But yes, it's available here.
Yeah, it's not in every municipality in Orange County either. I think
I would like to add something to that as well. Are you able to hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Tiffany.
Okay. One of the issues that I've run into with programs like that is that it's oftentimes up to the officer's discretion. That's an issue, especially when there's already bias coming into play, both bias that's obvious and that's not as obvious. I've worked with people to have their records sealed, and in the state of Florida, the judge has to designate adjudication withheld for you to be eligible. And I've oftentimes found that people just aren't educated on those caveats that could really give people a second chance, especially juveniles. That has been the part that I'm seeing. So if it's not within policy and it's based on people's ability to understand and to use that option, it's not as successful.
Absolutely. And that's where we've seen the results here, Tiffany, in North Florida. And we had to add in a layer of accountability as a caveat with the officer. They had to justify why that was not offered to that youth in the moment. Yes, it took some extra work, and the accountability had to stay there in order for us to see the results. And we did start seeing results. It took us a while, but, and you know where I am, I'm in Duval County. So, you know, I got challenges up here, but
yes.
That dedicated effort to keep plugging away to say, hey, these kids, they got to have a break. You got to, and justify why. So that kind of, it takes away that opportunity to just go to what's comfortable and just dismiss it. So I just, thank you so much.
So it's not enough to have it. It has
Right.
to be enforced. It has to be must. We can't rely on people to say, "Oh, I think I'll do this."
That's what happened when we
Instead,
floated
it
it
doesn't
out,
work.
but we didn't see any results. And then when you peel it back, you recognize that you've got to have the accountability at the officer level to say, for them to justify why they did not make that decision. And then that's where we saw the increase start. So
I really appreciate Tiffany and Jacqueline for you sharing. And we're going to get in the second half, we're going to talk about the positive community experiences, the way that we're correcting or solving some of these adverse experiences. So hold on to those ideas. We're going to get there. I can personally feel the tension building in my neck and shoulders from talking about these issues. So I'd love for us to take a collective breath before we dig deeper and learn even more about these adversities, specifically in Central Florida. So if you're willing, please close your eyes. Notice your breath. Feel your feet on the floor. Take a deep breath in, expand your belly. As you exhale, remember that you are doing the right thing. You are in the right place. And the arc of justice always bends toward progress.
Thank you, Adam, for giving us a pause. And I think the pause is part of the practice of the whole conference. And it's going to get a bit harder before we get to those positive and protective ACEs. As you can see, we've just done a high level, even though we're trying to really zero in on Central Florida, we've just done a high level. We could do a workshop on each one of these and it'd have to be more than 2 hours, so, and then we'd really need a whole day of yoga to get back on track. And so what we decided to do was just pick 2 to take a moment and follow a historical through line of where we are today, because I think that practice of understanding how we got to our current policies and practices, or how we got to our current the impact of those policies and to just do that as a practice, to go back in history, is a really important thing for us to do. So we chose housing and wages to dig in deeper to our Central Florida soil. So go ahead, Adam, next slide. So we want to follow a through line of policies and practices really related to housing since Reconstruction. And these policies and practices are really a part of our country's structural racism. And that has impacted and or created housing inequities. And then these housing inequities have contributed to several of the adverse community experiences, including but not limited to poor housing quality and affordability, poverty, historical trauma, and substandard schools. So we're just connecting several of those things listed in the soil of our ACEs tree. And all of these have contributed to differences in generational wealth, because housing and home ownership has been a key to generational wealth for the middle class. All right, next slide. So I thought we were going to be starting with redlining, but really here in Central Florida, we need to start back in 1920. We just commemorated, and really in many ways had a public conversation about the Ocoee massacre in a way this community probably didn't experience in the 100 years since this happened. Rachel and I were actually a part of a group that went to the Orlando History Museum and saw the whole exhibit on the Orlando massacre. Incredibly powerful. I don't know if any of you were able to see that. I'm incredibly sad it wasn't a permanent exhibit. I know they're working on having it web-based so that our school children can continue to learn about it. Though it'd be interesting to know if that's still possible. So there were some really good articles, and there was a particular article on this anniversary in the Orlando Sentinel that I'm gonna share some information that was in there. Julian Chambliss, who was a former Rollins College history professor and now is at Michigan State and a curator of an MSU museum, he was quoted in this article, when African Americans progressed too far in their efforts to own property and create a better life for themselves after the Civil War and during the Reconstruction era, white people resorted to unbridled violence, like the 1920 massacre in Ocoee and the 1923 massacre in Rosewood. In the same spot, white mobs torched a church 100 years ago on Election Day, which ended with a Black man being lynched in Orlando and Ocoee's Black community burned to the ground, all because Black residents wanted to vote. After white residents terrorized all the Black residents to leave following the massacre, Ocoee would remain an all-white sundown town, a dangerous place for Black people after dark until the late 1970s, early 80s. It also, this is just another example outside of Ocoee. Developers put protections on Winter Park's Virginia Heights neighborhood in 1920 that prohibited future homeowners from erecting houses worth less than $5,000 or selling them later to anyone who was not a member of the Caucasian race. And that was a quote is attributed to Scott French, who's a UCF director of public history. And Adam, maybe we could put that article in the chat if people want to read more. It's really powerful. And this quote that I put on the screen from the curator, Pam Schwartz, who, oh my gosh, she poured months into putting this exhibit together. And it's just such a source of information about the long-term impact. But if Ocoee's Black community had not been forced to flee their homes and intimidated into selling their land, the properties they owned would be worth more than $9 million today, including parcels belonging to July Perry near the Fruita Mix along Silver Star Road. So in this article, you can even see this neighborhood at Fruita Mix. Very sobering. All right, so next slide. Then we get to redlining. So you can read, this is actually from the National Housing Act bill. In the National Housing Act of 1934 established a new government agency called the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, to regulate interest rates and mortgage terms after the banking crisis in 1929 and in the early 1930s. The FHA prepared neighborhood security maps that were largely based on racial, ethnic, and economic status of residents. Policies under this law guaranteed federally backed loans to whites and legally refused loans to Blacks and anyone else who chose to live in or near Black neighborhoods. Right now, the next slide, we'll actually see one of those neighborhood security maps. So you can see what this looks like. Can you read it where it says green is the A, first grade, B, blue is second grade, C is third grade, D is fourth grade. So you can read those. And then this is the other picture, just in case you can't read it, just to show that covenants in particular neighborhoods named, they actually said, not of white or Caucasian race. This system assessed the risk of default based on the racial composition of neighborhoods, with English, German, Scotch, Irish, and Scandinavian people ranked highest, and Negroes and Mexicans ranked lowest. Because federally backed mortgages were rarely available to residents of the neighborhoods that were transitional, racially mixed, or majority people of color, lenders began redlining those neighborhoods. They literally circled areas on a map whose residents were people of color to indicate that mortgage lending would not be available. Redlining meant that credit-worthy applicants who would otherwise be eligible for a loan were denied mortgage loans because of the location of their property. Entire African-American neighborhoods were redlined or identified as grade D. So what did this do? This made it nearly impossible for appraisers in the private sector to do business in the Black neighborhoods because all the residents were considered bad credit risk. Home ownership at this time was the beginning of the white middle class as families of modest means began to build wealth. Areas with a low rate of home ownership had fewer assets, equity, and resources. Redlining led white communities that were next to Black communities to put up physical barriers, like the wall between Eatonville and Maitland, to stabilize property values. So the next slide. So here, even though this actually happened before the National Housing Act, and it's hard to read this, what it says in here, but you can see the red line here. And Sophia, as promised, it's the division line. So you can see where the red and the blue are side by side. That is actually division. So this is a map. If you can, Adam, can you do your cursor? Will they see that where Lake Eola is? So you can, are people oriented to how this map, where this map is for those of you who are Orlando?
That's
So
I-4 down the middle, right? Like that would be I-4.
Well, this was prior to I-4, which is a whole other issue.
That road looks like it might have become the interstate there.
Yeah, so this was in the Orlando Morning Sentinel on August 9th, 1924. The Orlando City Council passed segregated zoning maps, and they called them Negro Zone 1 and Negro Zone 2. And Zone 3, and I don't quite know where all the zone numbers are, but Zone 3 in that little article that you see there is what created Jonestown. And then you bring it up to current day. And so this is where what it looks like today. And you can see, so the gold is Hispanic, the blue is white, the red is Black, the green is Asian. So we still have concentrated, and you can trace this back to how we had different neighborhoods graded. And Rachel, you did a great setup. Also quoted in this article in Orlando Weekly was this was an example that actually was in Huffington Post that spotlighted Griffin Park neighborhood of Paramore, an area that was purposely surrounded by I-4 construction and now exposes residents to cancer-causing soot and noxious fumes. So I mentioned earlier, where do you find the predatory lenders? It's also really telling in almost any community, where do our interstates go and what do they disrupt? So I used to live in South Florida, and I know Overtown had some of the wealthiest Black resident citizens of Florida before the interstate, and Interstate 95 completely disrupted the economy of Overtown. And related to I-4, the child poverty rate in Paramore is 73%, right where the interstate. So you take all these things together, right? You have the massacres that didn't just happen in Florida. We learned a lot about Tulsa last year. All across the country, there were these burning out or sending devastation on Black communities that were becoming economically self-sustaining and stable. You have the redlining policy, and you have the disruption of Black economic centers by the interstates. All of those come together to disrupt that acquisition of generational wealth. Oh, I have one more. I'm so sorry. So this just is a graphic that was provided from Dr. Wendy Ellis's work at the Milken Institute that just shows I think it's an incredibly powerful infographic of how the policies that connect to the racial and ethnic exclusion, that connect to the home ownership, that connect to the wealth of different racial groups. So that's the through line. Do people see how that plays out today? And Adam's going to dig in a little bit more specific data in Central Florida.
Yeah, so we're talking about how home ownership can create generational wealth. And we saw how in Central Florida that was deliberately robbed of Black communities in the 1920s through those massacres, and then again through redlining and the housing policy. And so we're going to look at how that's affecting us today. So we have a lack of affordable housing. We're all probably aware of that happening in Central Florida. The way that affects us, that affects us on an economic arena is that it's really serving to prevent opportunity and economic mobility for those who have the least amount of wealth. The gap in wealth between the wealthiest Central Floridians and the poorest widened by about 23% between 2008 and 2017. This chart shows you the orange dots represent the percent of income growth for the percentiles of income distribution. So the lowest 5% of earners, their income decreased by almost 10% between 2008 and 2017, while the highest earners, their income increased by about almost 25%, right? Or 23 is what I said earlier, right? It's compared to housing costs. So we see that housing costs are actually increasing over the course of time for the lowest income earners, and they're decreasing for the highest income earners. Housing costs are disproportionately changing based on your income across time. So we're seeing that those who earn the least amount of money are also having the most hardship with housing, the highest degree of hardship with housing. Housing costs are decreasing for those who earn above the area median income, while costs for those below are increasing. These rising house costs are preventing those from with the bottom income distribution from having any capital. All their money is going to housing and probably creating debt, right? Even with the emergency rental assistance programs, this is still happening. That means they're unable to relocate because they don't have capital. They can't take risks because they don't have a safety net. They can't move up the income ladder because of all these challenges. They can't say, let me try out this new job. Let me go back to school and increase my education, because they have no margin because of the way that housing costs are affecting those with the lowest wages, the lowest incomes. And not only are the wages and housing changes so disproportionate for the lowest income earners, they're also having to live in places that have the poorest housing quality. This is a picture taken, I think, from Paramore or the West Lakes community. Roughly 56% of renter-occupied units in Orange County have one or more substandard housing conditions. And about 39% of owner-occupied in Orange County have the same. So these poorer housing quality, as you might imagine, they lead to poorer health outcomes, as well as higher likelihood of crime occurring in these dilapidated or kind of under cared for buildings. So it's housing doesn't just affect housing, right? And it doesn't just affect wealth or income or it affects so many other areas of livelihood, of your experiences.
And Adam, I just want to take this opportunity to say really quickly that I've been able to access a higher education and a better job because largely for the time that I was experiencing poverty, I was able to access subsidized housing. That really is what made my path easier because I had to reduce work, but as my income went down, my cost of housing went down. That is an essential piece of navigating to a higher economic status.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this issue of housing affects not only like as Lynette says, the air you breathe, the water you drink, your ability to care for yourself, the amount of crime in your community, but it also affects your access to education. So going back to this image of the way that through that policy, we created these grades for communities. Schools are still funded based on property values. So the values that were determined by this racist policy is still affecting the education that you get today. Your neighborhood property values affect the amount of funding that your school gets. So we can see that this is directly related to racism in our policy and our structures, through these security maps, through these residential security maps, these grades. And we don't know the answer to this question, but I thought it was a really good question that we asked ourselves. Wouldn't it be interesting to see which of the D-rated communities are now the D-rated schools, where the D-rated schools are or the lower rated schools. So we grade our schools now, A, B, C, D, right? We don't know how that overlaps, but I wonder. All right.
So this was a lot. We're going to take a different kind of pause and go into breakout rooms just to have a little bit of time to process. So we just want to ask you what surprises you or doesn't surprise you. How are you feeling? Is there a way forward? Is there any kind of solution? It's not going to be long. Just talk about whatever you have time to talk about in your breakout group. And Adam's going to start those.
Yeah, I'm just going to copy these questions and paste them in the chat so you all can see them when we go into our rooms. Welcome back from the breakout discussion. I know I heard some good discussion going on. Just gratitude for better understanding some of this information, an urge to action. Like, you know, we talk and talk and talk. What can we do, right? So I'm going to cover one more area that we're going to dig a little bit deeper on, and then we're going to take a look at positive community experiences and community-based solutions. So getting into that, what are we doing to curb or eliminate some of these adverse experiences in our community? So we're going to dig deeper on substandard wages. Of the 50 largest metros in the US, Central Florida is ranked 50th in hourly median wages. So this chart, you can't really see it, but I blew up the bottom 10. And there we are. Orlando metropolitan area is dead last for wages. Trailing, there's Jacksonville for you, Jacqueline, you're fifth to last. Yeah. So our median area wage is $17.59 an hour. That means half of everyone who's earning income in Central Florida earns below $36,588 per year. Yikes. 133,000 people alone in Central Florida work in the food service industry. And the average or the median salary for those workers is $23,000 a year. People are resourceful and creative, so they may have 2 or 3 of these jobs or a couple of part-time jobs to increase their annual salary. Right? But we know that right now we're dead last. We have the lowest median wages of any metropolitan area. We also are experiencing cost of living increases in Central Florida as well. The Orlando metro area was the only city in the top 10 of cities that were surveyed in this this cost of living survey, where all 5 of our main expense areas for cost of living have increased. So the 10 metros where the cost of living is increasing the most, we're number 5. And we were the only one on that list to have all 6 areas see an increase in cost of living. So groceries are increasing, housing costs are increasing, utility costs are increasing, transportation costs are increasing, healthcare costs are increasing, miscellaneous costs are increasing. I took the liberty of looking up childcare costs, if they were increasing in Florida, and they are. So between 51 and 175% increase for childcare, depending on the age of the child. So we have the lowest wages. Our costs of living are increasing in every area. But we're asking ourselves why. Why is this happening? The easiest answer, and it's not the only answer, is the nature of our economy here in Central Florida. It's heavily based in tourism. So we have incredible theme parks, attractions, world class, right? They're awesome. And I want to say this insight isn't to say that we need to stop having world-class attractions in Orlando. I think that they're an awesome way to jumpstart our economy, to keep it going, but we rely on them. And not only do we rely on the tourism economy, we as a community invest money into increasing the amount of tourism opportunity we have here. This is an image, kind of a conceptual image of Orlando, or Universal Orlando's new theme park, Epic Universe. And it received $125 million in subsidy from Orange County and $16 million in subsidy from the state of Florida. So a total of $141 million in government subsidy to make this theme park happen. So we're asking ourselves, what do we get for all of that money, right? One of the kind of thought leaders in Central Florida on the poverty in our economy is Eric Gray, who was the executive director of United Against Poverty and now runs the Christian Service Centers, I believe. So he's asking these questions, right? So he's asking, what do we get? What are the wages that our workers are going to get? So the starting wages for about 14,000 of the new employees that will be brought on with this theme park, they'll earn about $15 an hour, much better than the minimum wage, but nowhere near living wage. So we're seeing that we're investing in this economy of tourism, but what we're doing is we're adding jobs that are paying these same substandard wages as we've seen in the past, that basically create a need for charity and welfare services rather than really giving people the wages that they need to live off of. We know that it's not all on the tourism industry. I mean, the tourism industry attracts jobs and attracts people to this area to spend money in these low wage industries. But our metro center was founded in an area that's not close to a waterway. Historically, waterways are the key to have been the key to like a budding and growing manufacturing industry. Historically, it's relied on waterways, and so our manufacturing industry never had the chance to take off or grow or become industrialized the way it has in other communities. So we see that it's a combination of many factors. So there are human costs to these substandard wages. We've talked about them. They look like substandard housing. They look like using emergency rooms as primary healthcare. They look like reliance on food pantries and other charity for standards of living, as well as relying on public transit, which in Central Florida is underfunded and unreliable as well. It also looks like communities that have a high rate of violence in their communities, and access to cheap or lack of nutrition food as well. So the substandard wages, our tourism economy is creating a need for these areas as well. So now that we've exhausted our knowledge of adverse community experiences in Central Florida, I want to send us back into your breakout rooms for a moment, just to check in. So you had a chance to kind of digest. Lynette, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to remind people of the practice we did yesterday of serial testimony. Just make sure everybody in the room, we put together small groups on purpose just if you can make sure everybody in the room has a chance to talk, that would be really meaningful in the breakout group. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Lynette. So we want to provide a space to just check in with yourself. How is this information sitting with you? Where do you feel it? I was talking about I can feel the tension building up in my back, right? What stands out to you? And then in what ways are we, or are you specifically allowing or perpetuating some of these adverse community environments to thrive? A tough question to ask, but a very important one in order for us to get into what actions do we take. So we're going to allow about 5 minutes in this breakout room as well. And I'm going to open those rooms now. Welcome back, everyone. We're hoping to use the rest of our time to get into a little bit more action-oriented discussion. So I'll pass it on to Lynette to lead us through this next bit.
It automatically put me on mute. So we don't want to leave us all in despair. So we want to talk about some potential positive community experiences. Once again, this is not exhaustive. We are mostly sharing specifically from our experience as Poverty Solutions Group and circles of some things we've seen work. So we thought it might be helpful to talk about things that we've seen evidence of and not just theory. So so we have a model that relates to the PACES work and the work of the CRC network, and it's why we have seen it to be so valuable to be invested in the network as we continue to evolve as a community of how we become more trauma informed. Yeah, let's go to there we go. Thank you. So this is our framework as Poverty Solutions Group. On the left side, you'll see homelessness, low income, so more folks that are surviving. And on the right side is long-term sustainability, thriving. Often the approach to poverty is one of management, poverty management, not poverty reduction. And that happens because we primarily focus on individual change. And I think that that's really, hopefully in the context of our last day and a half, even all the household issues are not created by an individual alone. So if we only have individual-based solutions, it's going to be only a tiny number of those folks are going to make it all the way to surviving. So you can see this crisis to stability. As we focus only on individual change, people cycle between crisis and momentary stability. So we believe we need to add this community change. So the awareness that we're doing is really important. How do we look locally at things that we can change that maybe could be low-hanging fruit, which is a really good metaphor to use when we're talking about a ACEs tree, right? Some things are not that hard to do. Like one of the things I see, and Tiffany, you were talking about it earlier about the time needing to take off work, right? Some of the hours that our organizations that are helping organizations are open are not adequate hours, and it forces people to take time off. If you're a salary person, you can take time off and still be paid, right? If you're an hourly person, every hour you have to leave, right, your job, you're losing pay, right? So that's at the community. That's an organization can decide what hours they're open, right? So an individual alone, that middle, we just put cliff effects as one of those, right? An individual alone may be able to find some stability, but they do not have control over all the things that we've been talking about today in regards to overall community rate, wages, the mass transportation, the housing, right? Hopefully that's really making sense, right? So if we focus on community change, we become more self-aware, we become knowledgeable, we build social capital, bonding and bridging. We believe and we've seen that helps people move from surviving to thriving. And that's really what we're about. So Adam's gonna, we're not a social service agency. We aim to partner, kind of pass the baton, and we walk alongside families and individuals for an extended period of time so that they can really cross over that poverty line. And as I said, work toward thriving rather than surviving. So Adam's going to dig in a little bit more to our particular circles model.
Yeah, so this is the model we've found that does the work illustrated above or in the last slide in the most effective way. So we partner with Circles USA to really create a different system. This is going back to some of the information that Dr. Johnny shared yesterday that we were like, wait, we're doing this, but we just didn't have the language to talk about it. So thank you so much for that. We're recreating a system on the micro level at first, and then as that system grows, it affects and changes the larger system and structure. So the approach to poverty alleviation that Circles USA takes is, one, simply help families get out of poverty. How do we relieve the burden of poverty so that our families aren't experiencing all of these adversities? Their children aren't subject to all of these adversities anymore that are associated with poverty. How do we help them to build the resources, create plans, and move from that surviving or that crisis to stability churning all the way to thriving, to really sustainable, over what we say, over 200% of the federal poverty line. So it's through Circles that we help families to do that. And then the second and equally important purpose of Circles is to remove barriers that keep people in poverty. So this is the systems thinking. We understand that poverty, like Lynette said, it's not caused by individuals' choices or bad choices or individual circumstance on its own. Those circumstances are a result of systems. They're influenced by the healthcare system, our economic system, the education system, our history of racism through policy and community practice, right? It's rooted in these systems. So we're taking this approach and saying, it's not just about individual change, although we can do that. It's about systems change because it's necessary so that less people are falling into poverty in the first place, right?
Adam, I would like to interject here for just a moment. By all accounts, I have made it out. You know, I'm middle class. I own 2 properties. I make a very decent salary, but it's important to recognize that I didn't make it out in time enough to save my children and grandchildren from poverty. And that's why this work is so essential. For myself, that's out. I have a child and 2, almost now 3 grandchildren that are going to have to go through the same thing that I have. And this is why this work is so important.
Thank you, Tiffany. So we see it's not just about the individual, it's generational, right? So I want to talk a little bit more about how the Circles model works. Hopefully it'll give you some ideas, either in the work you're doing of how to structure or adjust what you're doing, or it'll get you like vibed up to join us in the work that we're already doing in Central Florida. So the circles model is based on this this building social capital, where our efforts are all around how do we expand each person's access to other people. And it's not just other people who have like experiences, or it's not a big group of people who are all experiencing poverty going through this together, although it has that in it. Circle leaders go through training together. They learn, I'm not the only one who's experiencing all of these obstacles. I'm not the only one who is having trouble with the education system for my kids. I'm not the only one having a 4-hour commute to work because I use the bus. I'm not the only one who is relying on food pantries for half of the food that I need and on food stamps for the other half of food that I need, right? You're not alone. Once the circle leaders go through training, then they get access to allies, volunteers who are from us, who have a background of stability, are able to give their time, energy, and in some cases, other resources to this movement, who receive training in the like as circle leaders, so that they can say, I don't have all the answers. I don't know exactly what you've been through, but I have an understanding and a sense and an ability to listen and partner with you and say, I want to walk alongside you as you lead me in your journey out of poverty. So they get access to 2 or 3 of these allies. That's why the green circle is bigger, because there are more allies than there are leaders. There are more people coming alongside the leaders to say, let me join with you in this fight, in this process. We support the youth through a similar kind of circles youth track. So they're receiving and learning, and they're able to kind of unlearn some of the mindsets that poverty can create for children, to disrupt the cycle of generational poverty. They're supported by staff people, the circles coach and the circles coordinator, which is me here in Central Florida. The coach provides direct support to the circle leaders and the allies so that they know how to build those relationships that are required to work together effectively on not only individual and family goals to reduce poverty, but also to work together to address those systemic barriers together. We have training facilitators as staff people too. So Chantel, who's on the call, is one of our lead facilitators for the circles trainings that we offer. So I'm really excited Chantel is with us all the time.
Hi, everyone. This work works, so let's work it.
That's right. Thanks, Chantel. And then we surround these communities of people, these growing and budding relationships, these plans to reduce poverty with resource teams. These are teams of volunteers, sometimes partner organizations, sometimes in the future, many of you, I'm sure, to come alongside these communities of people to support them with jobs and education resources, pathlines to careers that pay a living wage, right? The services team to connect to relevant services that are needed, often mental health services, housing services, educational services. The community team to structure the heartbeat of this community, which is a weekly meeting where everyone gathers together, eats together, and then does the work in various ways. The recruitment team, which helps to spread the word about circles and gets people in and trained into this community of poverty alleviation, and a big view team which leads the fight to address those systemic barriers. We call it the big view because it's taking a larger, wider view of poverty. So the circle leader will go through this 18-month process. That's really important for us because we're not trying to fool people into thinking that it's an easy, quick fix. Moving the needle on poverty is going to take time, energy, effort, and a lot of resources. We haven't seen the needle on poverty move for the better in over a generation. So we know it's going to take a lot of time and energy. So circle leaders and allies work together for 18 months and often more than 18 months to build relationships, to create plans to overcome poverty on the individual and family level, and then actualize those plans so that the circle leader, the burden of poverty is lifted off of the circle leader's shoulders. And often at the end of their cycle through the circle's initiative, circle leaders take on leadership roles in their community or within the circle's community, becoming allies to future circle leaders, serving on resource teams, becoming training facilitators, as Chantel has done, even becoming board members in our organization, which Chantel has also done. So there are many ways that the circle's process is transformational to help circle leaders use their voice, find their voice, use their voice, and create change on their own behalf and on behalf of others in their community. We want to talk about some other tools that we've discovered that are helping to bridge the gap and reduce the weight of these adverse community experiences as well. So I'll let Lynette take over now.
Before we do that, I just want to, I don't know if Tiffany's available right now, just to share.
I am.
Okay. I saw your beautiful picture, but just, any thoughts you had about circles trying to recreate a more positive, hyper-local system, and just your thoughts about that.
Absolutely. One thing I've struggled with is that I felt the marker of success was to leave my community that was under-resourced, not realizing the amount of treasure that was within the community that needed to be unlocked. I have since been able to dispute what we've always been taught, that we need to leave the area. And a lot of that came from my work with circles as a circles coach. I was kind of the go-between between the leaders and the allies, but I also did provide sort of a targeted case management approach because I did know quite a few of the resources and I was able to tap into my own experience navigating out of poverty. And this program truly does unlock the potential that is in every community that is under-resourced. One of the main factors was the advocacy of this program. Lynette and Adam single-handedly helped people realize what was going on at a higher level that was going to affect their community, and that never would have happened. We just don't grow up with that experience. So many things happen to us that have been planned out that we have no clue about. This program absolutely works. I just had one of my circles leaders reach out to me because her daughter was accepted into Howard University here in DC. It made me feel so magnificent to be that connection for her as she's coming here to this wonderful city. Just exciting work. I can go on and on and on, but this works.
So thanks for leading me right into this very well, Tiffany. So I almost forgot to share that we track the results of circles. So income increases, right? Education, access to education increases. Employment going from part-time to full-time increases, right? Home ownership increases. All these things that we've talked about in this presentation, in this workshop, are affected by circles, because circles doesn't just say, let's drill down on this one thing. It says, where do you want to go, right? Do you want to find housing? Do you want to own your home? Do you want to find more reliable transportation, right? And all of this happens through this module of social capital here. really taking time to invest person to person, peer to peer, to achieve these results in our community and across the nation as well, and Canada.
And Adam, you touched on something I think is super important that may have not been heard exactly. It's the leader's choice. Circles doesn't tell anybody what they need to do. They want the leader to articulate their wishes and their dreams, and we envelop them with support. We don't ever tell them you need to go buy a house, you need another job. The focus is, what do you want? And people that have experienced poverty are very rarely, if ever, asked, what do you want to do?
And Tiffany, you mentioned something a little bit ago about still hearing from circle leaders. I will say, and Adam and I are both trained social workers. This model is not how we were trained to do social work. We were trained to create boundaries, not give out your cell phone number, not right.
Mhm.
That's what we
Tell
were
us
trained.
tell us more about this, Lynette. I think this is really instructive. And tell us, is it what's it like not to have those boundaries and those barriers? Like, is it?
And I'm considerably older than Adam, so I had a lot more years like creating the bubble, right, and the boundaries. I'm not going to share, like, because we were taught that was enabling, right? Circles were like, where we say we'd love it if you created a friendship. The allies and the leader, along with what Tiffany was saying, the leader designs a plan. We encourage them to share cell phone numbers. Now, we do that after 20 plus hours of training separately. Not just part of the preparation is, how do you have unlikely friendships across racial, socioeconomic, language, culture, and you do it with mutual vulnerability, respect, dignity, right? So that's what part of and that's what we're going to talk about in just a minute, right? But I run into in the grocery store, I run into circle leaders all the time. Our cohort 1 that started in 2014, gosh, Adam, half of them are still involved in one way or another. They come back and they're facilitators, they're testimonies. We have somebody that finished, I think she was when Tiffany was with us, who just came knocking on our door and is like, I'm ready to do a habitat house now. Can you help us with the application, right? It's just, you have to get, it was uncomfortable, and now I love it, actually, because you have a long-term relationship and you know what works and we know what doesn't work. When you create more of a mutual relationship, you get to more honesty, and not always, and Tiffany and Adam know this, and Chantel, right? We don't always get it right. That is for sure. Not every match circle is a fit. When it is, it's close to magical.
It is magical.
Because you have these unlikely alliances that would never exist the way our communities are designed today. Never would they run across each other, because it's not right. So
powerful, Lynette, because this is the only way we're going to get to where we want to be, is if we know each other, we love each other. If we stay so segregated socioeconomically or ethnically, so this is, I love that you said it's not how we're trained, because it's teaching us that we're training wrong. We're training to divide instead of what you all are doing is breaking all the rules and coming together. And I'm in love with this. Thank you.
Well, now here's the thing. If you're primarily doing charity and relief work, you don't want to give out your cell phone number. because it's never going to end, and your calls are going to be on Friday afternoon, notoriously on Friday afternoon. But that's not what we're doing. And so it's not just the training, the whole design has been inadequate. If it wasn't inadequate, with all the money and all the volunteer hours, we would have reduced poverty much more significantly in the past 40 years, 50 years, right, since the war on poverty, right? How many resources, the design and the training, I think. So we want to take a few minutes, and then we do want to leave enough time to just do this, to generate. But we want to just share a few other things real quickly, because
share one minute. I'll share 1 minute too.
Go ahead, Chantel. Sorry.
I was a leader in the program about 4 years ago. It took me about a year to actually get in the program because I had a waiting time and I wasn't in the community that it was being led.
Oh, we lost you.
We lost you, Chantel.
Been out. Oh, hold on. Can you hear me now?
Gotcha now.
Yeah.
Okay, I said once I started as a leader 4 years ago, I haven't stopped doing the work since. And like today, I serve on the board and I serve on the different committees, and I served as an ally, and I serve on wherever I can because I see what it's done for myself. My children have been able to thrive in school. I've been able to thrive in my professional career, and it's not always perfect, and no relationship's going to be, but we learn the ins and outs of relationships. And one of my allies is still my best friend. She's led me into a career where I can show up for myself. I can speak up for myself. I can advocate for myself. I have a session at 1:30. I'm getting ready to go and prep for, so I'll see you guys then. But thank you so much for all doing this work. I'm still in the trenches and I need help to get out. So let's all connect and let's make it happen as we are. So thank you guys.
Oh, Chantel, thank you so much. So much. We know you've got a big thing ahead of you, and we wish you the best. Go.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for sharing. All right, so we just wanted to share, one, we don't do this alone, we're collaborative, right? So we don't have the solutions, we're trying to connect the systems together. So one of the things we're really excited, since we've mentioned the cliff effects a couple of different ways, right? So it's when the benefits drop. So if your income goes up, like if you're on public benefits to be able to meet all your needs, and we had a question about what the federal poverty level is. So a lot of and Adam did so well with the wages. Those wages aren't enough. So many people need benefits to cover their basic living expenses. If you get a job promotion, right, and it goes up just a little, your benefits, they drop out completely. Right there, I got my hands actually up in the screen. That helps. Drops out completely, right? So it doesn't scaffold proportionally. Does that make sense? And when we first started Circles under an initiative of St. Luke's back in 2013, 2014, we didn't find that many other people talking about the cliff effects. And one of the really challenging parts of finding a solution for this is that the benefits are all under different departments, and some are county level, some are state level, some are federal level, right? There is not a cohesive system. So the Federal Reserve Board of Atlanta created this calculator. We actually, Circle Central Florida is one of the pilot groups. We're still working out the kinks. The hope with this, it hasn't gone public yet as far as I know. I do believe CareerSource throughout the whole state of Florida is also working with the cliff effects. There are Circles chapters across the country. So it's starting to get out there. This does two things. One, it helps you identify when you meet that threshold so you can plan for it. So I will just plant the seed of one of the possible solutions our community could have is when we identify what that gap of funding is, can we identify organizations, potential funders, we know it's going to be for a short period of time, that would fill in that gap before we can change the policies, which absolutely need to happen, right? Can we find organizations that will fill in that gap so people don't fall off the cliff? Like, that's a potential. Some communities across the country are doing that. This tool will help us identify what that gap's going to be, and can also identify that it's finite. It's not a lifetime commitment. And then the other thing is, Tiffany's been talking about this so well today. People, there's just a lot of information that's not readily available. This Cliff planner is a career planner. So you can identify a potential career for you to go in and be able to calculate the cost and calculate your potential income to be able to anticipate what your overall educational costs will be, and as your income goes up incrementally, what that income gap will be. It's really, it's so promising. I will be very honest though, we're still struggling on how it can work as designed with the long-term impact, but it is the best thing we've seen so far, and they are absolutely committed to keep working the model. So that's one thing. The other thing we've kind of touched on, but we do a lot of preparation. We really call it immersive learning rather than training. Training, often we think in our minds as a check off a box, ooh, I've done my training. Immersive learning is more interactive, experiential, hopefully an ongoing, lifelong commitment. So we have partnered with organizations like Bread for the World, who created this incredible racial wealth gap simulation. It's one of the like we touched on the National Housing Act policy. This looks at 13 different policies. This is a learning simulation we do together with the Circle allies and the Circle leaders, so we can have shared language. This shared language and this shared background and education is one of the ways we can create this kind of mutuality and dignity within the match circles. We do talk about the trauma related to poverty. We talk about privilege. These are some of the things we're trying to do to become a trauma-informed organization. And it's not only our staff, it's the whole community is learning this together. And as you can see, as we have people with lived experience is at every level of our organization and a part of the leadership as much as possible. And this image is part of the, I really like this one. You may see people on boxes at the fence, right? Equality, so this is one of the learnings we do. Equality is when you give everybody the same size bicycle, no matter what their needs are. Equity is when you give people the bicycle that they need. Right, so circles and what we do in Poverty Solutions Group, it's not a set curriculum. It's not a cookie cutter response, right? And as Tiffany shared, circle leaders develop their plan, makes it a little messy. Our boundaries are a little messy, but we're looking at creating a more life-giving, hopefully healing-centered, hyper-local system, so that we can have change at least in small cohorts at a time. And I think we're ready and we only have a few minutes left, so.
Yeah, so we want to be able to work with you in this group and for the next maybe 7 minutes on exploring next steps. So answering any of these four questions, I shared a link in the chat. If you can click on that link, and you should be able to access another slide where you can share your thoughts with us, your responses. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. But before I switch to that slide, the questions we want to kind of think through. What is your next step? Now that you have been through this workshop, you have this information, at least in your mind or in your memory, and you've seen some of those positive community experiences and environments. What's your next step? What might you do differently? How might you adjust what you're doing? Additionally, maybe you're here representing an organization or a department of an organization. So what's your next step in that regard? In your professional life? And then for the CRC network, what would you recommend is the next step for us? How do we kind of take on this systems level work to address not only poverty, but the whole range of adverse community experiences and environments? Here we are. Look, you all are already there. If you have any trouble accessing this document, feel free to type your responses into the chat as well. So I see continue to lead the racial wealth gap to raise awareness. That must be from Tiffany. Think through the low-hanging fruit and see how we can bring these ideas to our leaders.
Adam, could I just make a comment?
Yeah.
So I'm reminded of a beautiful quote, and this is a safe enough space that I can say it. A quote that a Brazilian archbishop who was a brilliant man who was grounded in Christian sort of liberation theology. He said, Dom Helger Camara, who said that when I feed people, they call me a saint. But when I ask why people are hungry and poor, they call me a communist. And I think that it gets at a very, very pointed question here, which is the one that is looming in the background. And if we don't actually try to address it head on, we're not going to really get to where we want to go. And I'm just going to say it. I think the time has come that we have to ask ourselves as a society and get into some really uncomfortable places with especially people who are in positions of power and have a lot of money and influence. What is the value of a human life? Not economically, the value of a human life. Because yesterday I sent a quote, that from Paul Farmer, who said that the problem with the world is that some people matter more to others, right? Some people think that some people matter more than others. And I think that our systems level issues and our structural violence has its roots in this perception. Even the word poverty, which I use and value, I wonder if there is another way to frame this conversation now in which poverty itself, right? It has for years, but I could see how using the word poverty to those who especially find it difficult to talk about, let alone do anything about, when you have emotions of guilt, blame, stigma, and apathy, how are you even getting people's attention and awareness to actually care, right? And so I think that the value proposition of what is a human life and what is a human being is far more important than poverty. Now, it doesn't mean that this is going to solve the problem that someone's hungry tomorrow. I think that those things need to be done. But I just offer, in the context of this very, very complicated, probably one of the most wicked problems we have from a systems thinking point of view, I think it's a question that the time has come to ask it.
Can I say something about that? Like at Valencia, for years, we focused on the students, on like it's what was it, an achievement gap. And it was always like their deficit. And now at the college, we say be student ready, like to Asim's point, to rephrase. Poverty feels like it's those people. But what if we reframed it like it's a deficit in us? Because at Valencia now, we're beginning the language. We have to be student ready. It's not those problematic kids that aren't prepared. And what do we do about them? It's what do we do about us? So like to your point, Essing, let's keep talking about this. How do we frame this in terms of a community deficit versus those people deficit?
I think that's a wonderful point. And in this area, it's tough. I was living in the richest zip code in the country. And they have put systems in place to keep it closed off. But one thing I often tell them is if we do not make sure that our children and our families have what they need, their deficits that they're experiencing at some point will knock on everybody's door. You will not be excluded from the harm that they are experiencing if we don't collectively address this issue. We have to look at it as we are only as strong as our most vulnerable.
I just want to add to everything that educating the community, the people, is very important. I've learned quite a lot in this workshop, including my ignorance. I didn't understand why someone would used to work full time so that they could be on welfare. But now I understand now I understand more about the standard wages. Mm-hmm. So now I can sympathize or understand, and not just, and people are voting. So reaching out to the public, educating the public is not something lightly. It's making an impact. So continuing that work and raising awareness about CRC and these little workshops are very important.
Thank you. Yeah. We take a stance as an organization that poverty reduction is multi-layered and multi-level. And that's why one of the biggest parts of our organization is those immersive learnings, is getting this information out to the public, educating the public, like you're saying, helping people understand these concepts so that we can make different choices. Because if we stay in ignorance, we're going to make the same choices policy-wise, voting-wise, economically. So,
well, and I really want to push this. Reach out to the churches. Go to them, because I really believe a lot of faith houses or churches don't know how to get involved into the community. They don't know all these resources available, or they are unaware of what actually is going on, like everything we learned today in this workshop. So I would really say reach out to community leaders, churches, leaders, and educate them or share with them these resources, these workshops. And I think that can help get the word out to many people. So any way we can reach mass media or people, get the word out, it's going to make a difference when it's election times, what people are voting for, how people are voting. It's going to make an impact as well.
Very, very good. We don't know what we do without faith communities because it's one of our biggest source of allies. And in addition to circles, one of the things we do is a cost of poverty experience. And you'll be glad to know it's a 3-hour learning the life, walking in the shoes of somebody who is experiencing poverty. And that's happening with faith-based communities all this weekend. So hopefully that is encouraging to you. And one of our Big View things, we didn't get a chance to go into details, is voter education. We're nonpartisan, but a lot of people are intimidated, especially we don't do a lot of education in general about local elections, and local elected officials have a big impact on a lot of these community things that we've been talking about today. Housing, transportation, right? Schools, a lot of those it doesn't have to all go up to Tiffany's new neighborhood in Washington, DC. A lot can be done locally, and helping people understand the decisions that our local elected officials are impacting is huge. Mm-hmm. So the break doesn't start till 12:30. So we're in this in-between space, but our 2 hours is actually over. Thank you for being with us in our first time doing this particular workshop. As you can tell, we've had components of it in our work, but we haven't put it together like this before. We would appreciate any feedback that you have, both suggestions as well. We'll take compliments as well. But any suggestions, we just really appreciate that energy, even though this is a really hard topic. You guys have engaged with really positive, kind of collaborative energy, and we appreciate this. And Tiffany, a very, very special thank you. Your voice here today was deeply impactful and appreciated. We're glad you could join us, and that we're still connected, even though you're far away.
Thank you for having me today.